Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à Open Air. Je m'appelle Simon Bouchel. Okay, I'll stop now. I'm talking to you from the beautiful city of Paris. Devang is knee-deep in World Cup coverage. I think we can all appreciate how busy his life must be in that most ethical and clean of tournaments. We are revisiting a moment from our vault with the particular exploits of one Andre Agassi. Where I'm staying in Paris is about a 20-minute walk away from the beautiful 16th arrondissement in central Paris and the sites of Roland Garros. A few years ago, The Last Dance hit Netflix, and it was a worldwide craze examining the last ride of Michael Jordan. Dev and I dived into the life of one of tennis's favorite sons and the beginning of part 2 of the Las Vegas' native career. The keen-eared of you will recognize that Double A is my favorite tennis player of all time, so I'm excited to chat about him. Enjoy the show and merci pour l'écouter.
Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Andre Agassi and I'm joined as always by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, how are you?
Devang, I want to give you a quick shout out to something that you wrote. I always enjoy seeing every time your name pops up in written form. It's always gives me a lot of bit of joy to see it. And I want to talk about the quote that you have just about Agassi himself, quoting you, which is always very funny, but here we go. Agassi was an American prodigy created by a demanding father at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy in Florida. A rapid ascent to the top was equaled only by the stunning fall that culminated in 1997. Agassi failed a drugs test, which he later admitted was due to crystal meth use. He battled injuries and saw his marriage to actress Brooke Shields disintegrate. Meanwhile, Agassi's ranking plummeted to 141 in the world. The comeback was almost as remarkable as the fall, and I think you really do hit the nail on the head when it comes to this one. We're looking at 1999, but just a few years prior to this, the world really fell apart for Andre Agassi, and the rise for him to go to the top of the world, I think people tend to forget just how good he was at such an early age. He was Rafael Nadal before Rafael Nadal was Rafael Nadal. He was incredible. He still holds records that I don't think are going to be broken in terms of his stature in American tennis at a very early age. And I think looking back at him, I don't know whether you agree with this or not, but he looks the part of a modern tennis player. He doesn't look out of place when we watch him in 1988 or in 1990. He looks like someone who could still play on the tour today. And I think that's due in part to why he was able to play so deep into his 30s.
It's remarkable watching the footage that we did for today's match, because that was the biggest takeaway for me, is that he could play right now. And his game looks way out of place compared to some of his contemporaries at the time, where basically it was massive serve, massive forehand, and for the most part, that was it. And that could make for a successful player and someone who has an excellent career. And I think at this time, the people that could put it together in some other areas, like your Yevgeny Kafelnikovs, who obviously didn't win the amount of titles that some of the other guys did in that era, your Petes or your Andres, but Kafelnikov was a fantastic all-around player. And I think that's why you saw him rise, but it was quite one-dimensional still, even at this era in the 90s. And I think Andre throughout did not look like everyone else.
I think we always talk about it in regards to the different eras and the technology which carried a lot of players through different time periods in tennis, the evolution of string technology and the evolution of rackets. You do wonder what kind of player Andre Agassi would be in terms of his stature in the game if he was playing at the moment and he came up as a junior at this point in time. I think he's terrific, and I have a name which we'll probably get onto at some point, but I do have a comparison for what I think he is. But I think in judging just 1999 and some of the background, we could sit here and talk forever about some of the things that Andre Agassi has dealt with up to the point of this final, not least the fact that he'd lost twice in the French Open final previous to this, and he was supposed to win both of them, really. He fell apart in one way or another due to comical circumstances. And I don't know how much we want to touch on this. I think my recommendation is to read his book. I think that's one thing that everyone should do. If you're a tennis fan, you should absolutely do that. And I think any wider sports fan should absolutely take the time to read Open. I think it's terrific. I think it's one of the all-time best sports autobiographies. But there is so much to dig into. Not least the fact that it always strikes me as very funny the way that Andre Agassi talked about Sampras, and that famous quote of saying that he never thought Sampras was going to make it as a pro. There's tons of great stuff in that autobiography.
There's a lot of good Courier stuff. There's a lot of good Tarango stuff. There's a lot of stuff in general in that book. And like we said, there's too much to cover in the best way we can in this one podcast. So we'll focus in on Andre tennis-wise and where he is coming back, I guess, and where he did come back from. Because when we mentioned how dark things were in 1997, I think we might be underselling it a bit. Because I think the idea that an athlete could test positive for crystal meth, mind-boggling. I think even when you heard it first, when Open was coming out and this revelation was released, people were stunned. Like, it was mind-boggling at the time when the book came out, but at the time of when Andre was going through this, I think it was also a massive shock. And the game suffered because injuries were there and obviously personal life playing a role. But you talk about going down, Andre starts coming back up, and the way he comes back is playing in the Challenger Series events, the lower tier events outside the world's top 50, where in that time, I think there's far fewer players as there are now traveling the world playing, but it is really the less glamorous places on the tour. And this is coming from a guy who's a multiple time Grand Slam winner, but he truly did come back from the bottom and went on a run. I think the rise back to the top 10 was something no player had done before in a calendar year, the amount of spots he jumped, but it makes his interactions with those two pros he mentions in Open that much more interesting when he comes back. It also makes his outlook on life super interesting because I think you see him accept himself a lot better than he was doing in the past, as he acknowledged in his book, Bush.
One of the more interesting stances to take on the sport that you play and the life that you have is just Agassi's openness of just how much he hated the sport. He just genuinely hated it, and he hated his father and the situations that his father put him in terms of basically forcing him in a lot of ways to continue to pick up a racket, even though Agassi didn't want to do so himself, and just the force of which he was put to do so many different things. He didn't want to take endorsements. His father pushed him to do that sort of thing. And even his game, in a lot of ways, very much modeled. There's a reason he's nicknamed the Punisher, is because in a lot of ways, his father and his coaches told him, stand on the baseline, no one pushes you around. You stand and you break down anyone who comes close to you. And there's really not that many baseliners who play in the same way as him. He's a really interesting character for that because he stands directly on the baseline. He never gets pushed off of it. He'll take the ball early. He'll move you side to side, and he'll just run people like crazy, which makes, you would have thought, an ideal candidate to play on a clay court. But he was more than... He was a complete tennis player in so many ways, and that is illustrated by the fact that he managed to do so well on all four surfaces. But going into this 99 final, of course, he's won on three surfaces, and the final one, clay, is where we come to, that he was trying to complete the career Grand Slam.
Gil Reyes, who is Agassi's best friend and his strength coach at the time, is featured prominently in the footage that we watched for this one. Super interesting guy, but that fitness that you mentioned about Andre Bush is legendary, and it shows in this match because I think you see the difference between an athlete peaking and an athlete rapidly declining in fitness before our eyes so quickly. And Agassi, obviously well known for his legendary fitness.
Now, at this point, right, like in 1999, wasn't always the case. Certainly wasn't in his early career. He was spoken of as being a bit chubby, a little bit out of shape, liked a little bit too much of the alcohol and the things that come along with, as illustrated by a failed drug test. But yes, you're right, and he credits Gil Reyes excessively about making him become a better pro and forcing him to be a player who was at peak physical condition. So it goes to show you, right, even at the ages that he was, and this is at his late 20s, he was in the best shape of his career because he was forced to be that way.
His opponent in this final was Andre Medvedev from Ukraine.
And if you're asking yourself who, then that's a good place to start.
Beat Pete Sampras and Guga Kuerten, among others, on the way to this final. A player widely beloved on the tour. There's a hilarious anecdote of Andre Agassi himself giving Medvedev some tips during a meeting at the Monte Carlo tennis tour event, where I think Medvedev was basically contemplating a change in careers. He was ready to hang it up. Like, that's how bad things were going. Things were going bad for him coming into this 1999 French Open. He had been on a disastrous run of losses. Like when we talk about an unexpected run to a final of the tournament, we know the French Open is, I guess, maybe more suited for this than others out of the slams on the men's side, but this run to the final, Bush, is a truly remarkable thing that, I don't know, like, I'm sure there are other comparables, but these are some big-time names this guy is running up against and taking out.
He is. Medvedev's no slouch. And I think that's one thing that tends to get forgotten about this sort of thing. He did win the French Open as a junior in 1991, and his best performances, by and large, came on the very slowest of clay courts. Hamburg is so slow, it's like playing in concrete. It's that levels of slow. And he won that tournament 3 times. He made it to the career high of number 4. And as you mentioned, he had a very serious wrist injury, which caused him to really consider his place in the sport of whether he was going to carry on. But I think this year that we're watching in 99, his run, a lot of things came together for him, not least the conditions. And I think it was, and we watched this final, just how unbelievably slow that court is. It is painful to watch the ball. And I think it's quite funny because you don't tend to see that happen very much anymore. It's like looking in a time capsule sometimes at this final, because it seems like a completely different era.
It's hilarious because they're both two balding men wearing patterned shorts and same kind of white t-shirt on YouTube footage that is below SD, I want to say, at best. Makes for a hell of a viewing experience. Like, just getting your bearings while watching this was hard, I think, in terms of watching two guys slug it out who might as well be twins.
Man, and there is some junk in this match as well. As cool as the storylines are, and it is very, very cool to see these two players get to a Grand Slam final and duke it out in the way that they do. And it's a tactical match that has a ton of good stuff in it. But by God, the standard is not great given the court. And you can't blame them, really. It is raining, it is windy, it is very, very cold. You're seeing people in the crowd who have... This is midsummer in France. It's supposed to be nice and warm, but these people are layered up with jackets. You see people huddling with their umbrellas to try and keep some warmth to them.
It didn't look like they were enjoying their vacation, particularly on that exact moment. Just to touch on that French Open in general, we had some absolutely incredible finals. Bush, on the women's singles side, you have Graf Hingis, which was an epic in its own right.
Hingis must have been very young at that point. Was this the youngest? She must have been like 16 or something at this point in time. Forgive me for my lack of knowledge on this one, but I'm sure she was very, very young.
She was born in 1980. She was born in 80, so she would have been 18 at the time.
Jesus. It's insane, isn't it?
Wild. And on the men's doubles side, you have Goran Ivanisevic and Jeff Tarango losing to Mahesh Bhopati and Leander Paes, India's first ever Grand Slam title. Massive moment. On the women's doubles side, you have the Williams sisters' first ever Grand Slam doubles title, beating Hingis and Kornikova, who were a lights out doubles team, which is buried in the rubble of history. That Anna Kornikova was fantastic playing doubles, as well as being pretty damn good at singles. But again, a conversation for another day. Roger Federer's first time in a main draw. Is that right, Bush? You kidding me?
That's correct. As Gaston Gaudio as well. And looking at these top 16 seeds, it's pretty interesting to see the names on here. Not least 2 British players ranked inside of the top 15, which is kind of cool to see Greg Rosetsky and Tim Henman both in that draw, especially in the top seeds. There are some names here that really time has forgotten, but there are some big names as well, right? There are tennis players from this list in the top 16 seeds who made it to the Tennis Hall of Fame. There is a player ranked number 16 who I just completely forgot existed. I forgot that Thomas Enquist existed until I watched this. And I watched some Thomas Enquist highlights. It was very fun.
Bush, you mean off-brand Stefan Edberg? Is that who you're talking about?
Wow, that's disgraceful. That's upsetting to all of our Swedish fans out there.
It's terrible luck for Thomas Enquist that happened. Because he had some game as well. Marcelo Rios, 9th seed. Alex Croatia, Patrick Rafter. And I love Kafelnikov, Bush. I love the way he hit his backhand as well.
Yeah, really. A player that we should do an episode on at some point, especially doing look-backs, is one that really the annals of time have forgotten in some capacity, just how good he was. And he's the top seed here. But yeah, maybe not given the respect he deserves, especially I think in North American media by just a little bit of the personality side of things. He maybe North American media didn't quite adjust to his kind of personality.
Hell of a Devils player as well with Paul Harhus. It's a walk down memory lane. Had a lot of fun. When we come back after the break, we'll get into the match itself. It's Medvedev Agassi French Open final. We are back on the Open Air podcast. We're going to get into the match right now. Bush, it's Dick Enberg, legend, with John McEnroe on the call. It is a bit jarring listening to John McEnroe at this time, 1999. I'm not saying he's lost anything now, but he definitely sounds different in 1999. Am I wrong here?
I think it's a very difficult one to try and analyze without knowing the person.
Sorry, I think there's less BS in this version. This 99, I think there's less, not polished, but like I think he's still close enough to the game where he's like, all right, I know a lot of these guys. I played with some of them, but I'm going to tell it like it is with less of the cliches, at least what I found listening to this.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think he's actually just doing the job as a tennis analyst and is not doing John McEnroe doing a tennis analyst. And I think there's a very big difference between the two of them. It is actually nice to hear someone who knows what they're talking about, talking and analyzing about this match, because I think he does a pretty good job through all of it. By the way, it does help having Dick Enberg sitting next to you. It really does.
I mean, also shutting the hell up, like when you're with Dick Enberg is probably number one on the to-do list when you're paired with Dick for a sporting event.
I think we both could do fine, right? If we're both sitting there, we could be walked through a match.
I think I could get it under 20 words. Like something insane happens, just wow. And that's it. That's all you need to say. Let Dick take it home. Awesome to hear his voice on that call. But not awesome was the quality in the first set, especially from Andre Agassi, who was, let's just be frank here, Bush, garbage.
Yeah, absolutely trash. This first set is one of the worst sets of tennis I've ever seen from Andre Agassi. And this is going back to, I've watched some stinkers from him over the years, but my goodness, he's dreadful. And it's testament, I think, to Medvedev's tactics. You look at the man, he's big and brutish and 6'4", but the man moves well. He moves very, very well on the clay court. He knows what he's doing out there. He's no mug. And in a lot of ways, I know this is going to sound as a weird comparison, but a little bit of Tyson Fury in him, right? A little bit of like, everyone laughs at him. He's big and sort of looks a bit out of shape and everything. But the man moves very, very well, and he knows what he's doing out there, and he has a good brain on him, and he hits his backhand very well and his forehand very well. And tactically, he gets things spot on in that first set. He looks like a man who is not in his first final. He looks like he's just going to go out there, put the balls nice and high to Andre Agassi's forehand and backhand and see if Agassi breaks down. And my goodness, Agassi does break down. The balls end up everywhere, just everywhere.
Medvedev served extremely well and his forehand was on point. And I think McEnroe makes a comment during this match where it's basically like, in this era of players, if you can serve really well and hit a big forehand, you'll be all right most of the time. Because not enough guys really have the variety to challenge that. But Medvedev served fantastically. You know, it's a cheap comparison because they share the same last name. But movement-wise, there are some shades of Danny Medvedev. I know Danny's 6'6", but Andre Medvedev 6'4", two big guys. But the movement was impressive, and I did see some brief similarities to the Medvedev that's playing right now. But that is a comfortable first set for... Maybe, Andre's the 13th seed here, and he is probably the favorite, but I think coming into this match, he'd play more tennis, maybe, and he had to play her body on an extra day because of rain plaguing the tournament, so he was maybe not the fresher player, but throughout the 2 weeks in Paris for Agassi, was getting down into holes and digging himself out, but I think the hole he got himself into in this one was a different one because he quickly finds himself really now staring down at getting trucked in the second set.
Yeah, and I wrote in the notes, they're not punishing rallies at all. It's not like they're both, standing and whacking the ball from the back of the court and they're really struggling to catch up with things and it's grinding out things. No, they're kind of just tactically trying to move the ball around, just given the conditions that are there. It is very slow, it's very rainy, and it's very, very windy, and you can see the Agassi doesn't deal with it very well. He really doesn't. His footwork's absolutely appalling in the first set, and pretty much the same in the second set as well. And it really badly affects him. And I think one of the biggest things above everything else through these first two sets, and especially at the early part of the second set, Agassi cannot make any inroads in the Medvedev serve at all. And Agassi's struggling hard with the ball toss. And it proves very, very challenging to get into this match.
I had some traumatic flashbacks to my experience in Paris last year when I was watching the highlights, because that rain when it's sunny outside, that taunting rain that's like, haha, it's nice outside, but also it's raining now, we can't play. It was basically what happened to me when I went to Roland Garros. So I could empathize with the people sitting in the crowd. They got to watch full tennis, which I was jealous of, but it did not look comfortable at all. And Agassi looked extremely uncomfortable. I think watching young Brad Gilbert in the stands, Agassi's coach, probably alongside Gil Reyes, one of the reasons Agassi made it back, one of the reasons he's such a hard worker is having Brad Gilbert, beside him. But Brad is looking young. He's got the hat going, but he's also looking extremely pissed off. Like he is swearing and like yelling towards the court, looking at Andre through these first two sets.
Rightfully so, as well. Agassi plays terribly. Make no mistake about it. This is as bad a two sets of tennis as you're going to see from a 13th seed and multiple-time Grand Slam champion. He looks completely out of his depth. He doesn't really look like he wants to be there. And quite frankly, given his prowess and status in the game as being one of the all-time great returners, he won 1 point on the first serve of Medvedev through two sets. It's not good enough, and it basically explains why he ends up being down 6-1, 6-2, and pretty much on the precipice of being knocked firmly out of contention in three sets without any problems at all.
It was bad enough you had Dick Enberg teeing up the various other sports going on across the NBC network, which included John McEnroe giving a massive shout out to Dominic Hasek and the Buffalo Sabres, who were playing the Stars in the Cup final. Remember that horrendous no goal in the crease, Brett Hull, which we laughed at in Toronto because screw Buffalo. That was the thinking at the time. I know. Dick Enberg's now, he's promoting other stuff. That's how bad it's going. We'll cut to end of second set when it's looking really grim for Andre.
Medvedev 6-1 and 6-2, his eighth ace. And talk about comebacks. NBA tonight in Portland. The Trailblazers trying to dig out of Love 3 down against the San Antonio Spurs. NBA Showtime, followed by Game 4, the Western Conference Finals. It begins tonight at 6 Eastern on NBC.
Yeah, so it's Spurs, Blazers, Bush. I'm sure that game was exciting, but like these guys are ready to pack it in. We're ready to cut away from Paris for the day.
This is a hard watch. Let's make no bones about this. As much as we enjoy watching tennis and as much as we enjoy doing these retrospectives, it's really fun actually to go back a lot of times just you kind of check yourself in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, I think I knew sort of what happened in this era and what this final looked like. I had a vague recollection of what happened in this final, and then watching it back, oh my God, it's absolutely terrible. The first two sets are so bad. You're just willing something to happen in the third set, and you're kind of actually wondering in a lot of ways, what does Agassi do differently? When he's playing this poorly through two sets, and Medvedev, I think, is playing fine. I think he's playing solid, good tennis, like big serve, big forehand. He's doing ABC tennis, like you 1+1 sort of tennis. You put the ball in the court, and that's it. That's all you do. So what does Agassi do differently? And I think that's the fascinating point that we can talk about coming forward, is that what happens differently from sets 1 and 2 going into 3, 4, and 5 that manages to turn this match around?
The answer is simple enough, that he got another ball back, or he maybe was not going for as much, but Medvedev started to maybe feel the need to go for more, because his margin for error became a big problem because you weren't seeing these mistakes in the first two sets, but perhaps him feeling the pressure to close this and seize this moment because he senses a wary Agassi makes him trying to play out of his ability. Because I think maybe less than Andre playing better. I think you saw Medvedev's level drip big time.
I would agree with you. I don't know that I think in a lot of ways Medvedev just tries to play bigger than he has the potential to do, and it's very weird to watch it. And I think he talks about it. We've watched a clip the other day, the French Open uploaded, when it talks Medvedev has an interview. specifically talking about how he just went away from the tactics. He went away from the tactics in the first two sets, which is to not give any pace to Agassi, to try and maneuver the ball around the court. And he just stopped doing that. And I think Agassi recognized in a certain way, and he got his timing a little bit more. And it helped him sort of just stick around in some games. And I think the rain break really does help as well in this third set.
You get the brain break, you get the famous Brad Gilbert losing on Agassi, pep talk / like, what are you doing? Like, this is ridiculous. Words of wisdom that do seem to work. And it's also Agassi like surviving, because it's extremely nervy. At the end of the third set, he gets out of it, basically just trying to string some points together, which he does. And at this point now, the French crowd is super behind Andre Agassi. I don't know if they were coming into it exactly, but at this point, they are all in on the man from Las Vegas.
They really are, yeah. And I think he is a superstar. And I think this is the thing that we tend to forget, right? And I think even now sitting here, he seems like a distant figure in so many ways. He does have some involvement in tennis. He certainly has coached, and he's coached a bunch of very high-profile players over the past few years. But it doesn't seem like he has the standing, really, in tennis. And I think it's a weird thing to say, but I think he's often overlooked as one of the all-time greats. And even looking back here, right, he is the favorite, and he is a global superstar. But it is kind of interesting looking at the parallels between how he's seen now and how big his standing was back in 1999.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. You know, we see a lot, obviously, of John McEnroe around the tour, like a lot of him. And you see Bjorn Borg at Laver Cup or other big tournaments, and obviously you see Rod Laver traveling when he can. Like, you see these guys, you see them all around the tour. What happened to this generation? Like, you don't see Pete Sampras anywhere. You really don't see Andre much anymore. Like, Jim Courier does TV stuff, but like, where are these guys? Isn't it weird that like there's a gap? And this was American tennis. Like the men's heyday. These are the guys.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think one of the biggest things, and I think Sampras has talked about this at length as well, is that it was such a grind. And this was the early days, really, of the tour expanding to the point that it had players jetting all over the world and being in a certain location for 10, 11 days at a time at a tournament if you're at the top end of the game, and traveling with an entourage. I think they just got tired. And I think it's as simple as the fact that they, for 10, 15 years, traveled all over the world and stayed at all these places, that they just got sick of it. And Sampras is very open about saying this, is that he just didn't want to do it anymore.
For that piece I wrote for The Score and the 5 long-form documentaries you'd like to see, I talked about Pete's run in 2002 at the US Open, and you know, both guys looked old. And I know Pete was 31 at that time, but walking around the court after a serve or picking himself up, you know, Andre does that shirt tug thing that he always used to do, which I saw a lot of during this match, which I love, but he played a lot, many more years after this, but he even in that point looked old. And I felt like those years, or maybe the grind that you mentioned, maybe did get to them, because it's a shame. It's a shame that they're not more involved. And I expect that when Roger and Rafa and these guys go, they're going to be around a lot. But it's almost a bit of a lost generation because these guys meant a lot. And in terms of where I was watching this at the time, I mean, my dad was a huge Agassi guy. Like, he loved Agassi. I was more of a Sampras guy, but I think my dad backed Andre Agassi hard. And as he was watching this unfold, I think just disbelief was the biggest thing, because for him to get this far and then seemingly just go away entirely, it seemed against the run of play or off script for everything that we knew about Andre Agassi and what he came back from. And obviously, yet again, it was, because he gets the third set, and now the fourth set, he gets an early break, and now we're talking about Medvedev beating himself. He's spraying the ball all over the place.
Yeah, and it's actually it's hard to watch it at some points, because this ball is flying all over the place. We've had the first 2 sets of Agassi doing that, just off nothing, middle balls, but Medvedev's getting looks, and he's getting looks that he was putting away in the first 2 sets, and he isn't. And midway through the fourth set, he has 14 unforced errors, and Agassi has 1, which shows how things have flipped around and changed. And some of the shots that Medvedev is attempting to hit here, like Roger Federer couldn't make. There's like not a chance.
They're not in his bag, right? Like, I don't know if he has that ability.
No, man, like, just just do what you were doing. Don't try and go out your wheelhouse. Sometimes it's okay just to know your limits. And I think it probably was the fact that he was so close to the finish line that he had Agassi so rattled that maybe overconfidence just crept into the game, and that's the result of it. He just pushed a little bit too much. And when you're anyone who knows who's played on a tennis court, when you're going for a little bit too much or you're just a little bit too tight, the margins in tennis are so small, especially when you're hitting the ball as hard as they are and the movement that's required on a clay court. Things go very badly wrong if you're even a little bit tight or trying to go for a little bit too much.
I wonder if he was concerned perhaps of becoming too much of a pusher in these rallies and just trying to get the ball back, because he's worried that maybe Agassi is going to go for broke and just hit him off the court. But even at that point, I think that's probably still the safer strategy. But that's obviously easier said than done when we're looking back at this over 20 years later. But as I'm watching this today, I'm like, man, Med, like, you got to relax a bit, because he is hitting the ball everywhere but inside the court, and it leads to him losing the fourth set and now becoming a toss-up for who's going to win this. And I think the toss-up is like, all right, Andre's back in the driver's seat. But I think what I loved was Dick Enberg's a master of calling a game, but that sense of anticipation, like, he knows it's coming. Euphoria builds to the moment of Andre now consolidating and getting the fourth set. It's that true chill generating experience.
The thought of Spurs Blazers and the NBA playoff broadcast and all the things that we were talking about when it was so lopsided, they are very, very long gone at this point. They have been replaced by very deep, long promos and talk about how many players have won all 4 Grand Slams on different surfaces. And it's interesting to hear how quickly the narrative flips when we're back at the 5th set. And I think one of the things that gets talked about this final, I think it's one thing that I'm certainly going to reflect upon myself going out, is that when you see a player coming back from 2 sets to love down and eventually going on to have the success they do in this match, you tend to think there's a switch that gets flipped and one player just plays so much better. They play more aggressive tennis. They find their game and all these sort of things. That's not true in this match. And that's been the narrative for this 1999 French Open final. Agassi doesn't play that well at all. He probably raises his level from about 30% to 60%. And that's just about good enough, really. He just does enough through that 4th set. And he just hangs on, really. And that's really what happens. And then by the time we get to the 5th set, he's more in a rhythm and the weather's got to the point where it's slightly better that he can hit a few more shots.
It's wide, and we go to the 5th and decisive set. Andre Agassi, Andre Medvedev, 1 set for a Grand Slam title.
We get to the 5th set. Bush, you mentioned how slow this court was, but I think if they tried to play on a court this slow today, trials would be held and consequences would come for people, because I cannot imagine joyfully watching a court that slow in 2021 or the future.
Tennis is finished. Honestly,
what is happening here? Did they have people shooting water directly into the clay at all times? I wasn't sure.
I think I would have a very strong chance that I could get back some of these forehands from Andre Agassi if I stood 19 feet behind the baseline. It's that.
To be fair, it was a wet couple weeks in Paris, but the slowness of the court cannot be understated. And it also made the shift in strategy for Andre, which basically was don't beat yourself, coupled with also your forehand's pretty damn good. It's one of the better shots in the tour. Start using it more, and my God, is he using it well. It gets to a point, though, where you're seeing some signs from Andre Medvedev that he's not going to go away easy. And I think that hold that Agassi has early in the 5th set is indicative of that.
Yeah, and I think that's there were very, very lengthy games in this match, and Agassi has them at the start of the 1st and 2nd set, where he's struggling hard just to close out games, where you're getting 3, 4, 5 juices, and it's really, really challenging. The momentum sort of flips a little bit that Medvedev has to fight off those, but we both players get a series of very challenging games to close things out, and it's really a testament to how slow the court is, that it's very challenging to end points.
So, of course, the commentators are talking about it now. Andre Agassi had not won the French Open up to this point. He wanted to become one of an elite group who had won the career Grand Slam, joining Fred Perry, Don Budge, Rod Laver, and Roy Emerson. It had been a long time, Bush, since this mark had been accomplished. I think what among the many things that made us feet crazy, I think, is the fact that Andre Agassi was the guy that was going to break some pretty old history, and the fact that it was Andre after, frankly, bizarre run to the top. I think it might have been fitting maybe that it was him to be the guy, because if you would have put a bet on that, you would have returned a pretty penny.
He was a modern tennis player before modern tennis. I think that's the best way I can talk about him, is that you watch him in this period of time, in this fifth set, playing the way that he is. That's the way that Novak Djokovic plays. Honestly, it's the exact same style. I mean, Djokovic plays a little further behind the baseline, is slightly more athletic. Maybe the power's a little more now in 2020 than it was back here in 1999, but Andre Agassi looks like a modern tennis player, and it is not surprising to me that he was the player that did it across all four surfaces in a lot of ways. It's obviously then it's shocking, just given that he's a baseliner, and a baseliner goes on to win Wimbledon and all the sort of things that come with it, and how long it is before another player does it. Before Leighton Hewitt does it again as a baseliner in whatever it is, 2000 and something, 2001, I think it is. But yeah, it's to me, it isn't surprising. But then again, I have the idea that history is behind me. So I can sit here and look like a king in terms of my knowledge about this. But at the time, it must have been pretty shocking to them.
Yeah, see, you're on a pretty big high horse, Bush, for calling out things as not being surprising decades after they happened. Oh, yeah.
I think someone's going to break Sampratz's 14 Grand Slam records. I can say that.
I called the Berlin Wall falling in 2005. Thank you very much. So we get to 2-2 in the fifth set. This is the big time game of the match. This is the basically where things go sideways for Andre Medvedev. Punishing rallies. We have, of course, the clay madness of a ball being called in when it was out, and Agassi stopping play and basically being like, it was out. Umpire coming to check. Umpire saying, yes, Agassi was right. The ball was out. Medvedev had given Agassi a couple of points earlier during the match out of a spirit of fair play. I think he probably felt hardly done by. Agassi got a net cord in this game as well. But after all of that, all that truly grueling rallies involved, Agassi gets the break, and now he can see it. And I think he hits now, Bush, some of his best shots of the match in this period.
Don't talk about it enough, do we? Just how beautiful the backhand down the line is from Andre Agassi. Someone stands so close to the baseline, taking the ball on the rise. It's poetry in motion. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. And even here in 1999, racket technology as it was, there's very few players who can hit that shot and make it look as good as Andre Agassi did. It's beautiful to watch.
Agassi nearly gets the championship on Medvedev's serve. He has 3 chances, but the Ukrainian guts it out to hold. It's on Agassi's serve now. Medvedev really can't muster anything back in the return game, and there it is. It's done. Andre makes history.
And you wonder why people love this game? A heroic effort by Agassi. He went deep inside that little body to come from 2 sets down and win this treasured title. One of the great comebacks in Grand Slam history.
Bush, how great was that hug between Medvedev and Agassi? I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, I thought so as well. It was great respect between the two, and we talked about this during the episode, but a little bit of a kinship as well, right? Both with very bad wrist injuries throughout their career. They probably had a little bit of common knowledge about how that would affect, how it did affect their playing career. So the two, I wouldn't say they were friends, but they were certainly very friendly with each other. maybe not the closest of people, but certainly a good deal of respect between the pair, and it was really, really cool to see that.
Andre didn't say congrats to Medvedev right away in his acceptance speech, which I found super strange because I feel like that is now what you have to do.
I think we're spoiled by some of the players that we've had giving.
Was this like in the 90s? In the 90s, were people just harder? I think that's what people were just tougher in the 90s. I feel like they're like, I don't need to say congrats. Like I just beat them. Do I need to say anything?
Dude, this was the era of cutthroat businessmen and all this sort of thing, right? Stock exchanges and all this sort of time in the 90s.
New metal and Limp Bizkit. And I just, maybe we became soft, but the no congrats startled me. But loved the speech overall. I loved Andre talking about Gil Reyes, of course, and his coach, Brad Gilbert. But just basically, I don't think he really believes it as he's talking. And he's got his hand in his pocket as he's making the speech. And it's everything about that image. I'm like, yeah, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect.
Agassi sobbing on court to conclude this match. I think one thing that we can say about it, whether or not, who knows, we're not inside of his head, but this is a dude who's been through so much, and I'm pretty sure he's very, very rattled at the conclusion of this match. Just all the things that his marriage breaking down, Class A drug use, being ranked 140 odd in the world, many, many things, playing on, I'm sure, some pretty terrible courts in the Challenger circuit. Lots of things probably going through his head at that point, coming back to the pinnacle of the sport and winning a Grand Slam. I imagine it was a very interesting period of time at the conclusion of this match. I don't know how clearly he was thinking.
I was going to say, saying crystal meth is bad enough, but when you say Class A, I assume it's somehow more dangerous and sinister than crystal meth alone, but it's true. It's true. It's wild.
Like I should explain that for any non-British people that are listening to this. Class A is a
Class A
phrase
drugs?
given. It's a breakdown of how drugs are categorized in the UK, and it's what the base, the song, the A Team, from Ed Sheeran. It's based upon that idea.
The more you know, people, the more you know.
What are you implying, Devang?
When that revelation was made, when Open came out and the crystal meth revelation was made, that was massive news. Do you remember that, Bush? Like when that was dropped?
Well, the amount of monocles dropped in the tennis world was pretty astonishing.
Like, what?
And, it was staggering. Also, massive news. Just the amount of coverage that got. We're talking front page of newspapers and outlets at that period of time. Roger Federer himself on record as being incredibly, incredibly upset by this. And I mean like upset, like genuinely calling out Andre Agassi in the media and talking about handing back Grand Slams and abolishing records at that period. I think Marat Safin said that he should give back all of his Grand Slams. It's like, whoa, let's calm down a little here. This is not a performance enhancing drug at all.
I'm not trying to glorify the use of crystal meth by any means, but I think it's absolutely nuts that Agassi was able to win anything at that point. And I think that's another track and a journey it's been to 2020 since 1999, or even since when that revelation was made public. But I think the fact that Andre Agassi did crystal meth and was still a top athlete was like something that people couldn't believe, because it's like, how can they maintain the physical level? How can they win titles when they're on that substance? But I think the other aspect is I think for Andre, it's like you're living day to day like that, like your mental health aspect. You forget what you're doing on court, even like being normal, quote unquote, during that time, and people not suspecting you. It adds up to a lot. And I think like the Andre Agassi story in general is one of perseverance, but it's remarkable, and it's a story about fighting. I mean, the fact that the women's winner of the 1999 French Open, Steffi Graf, would become his wife, and you have these like little things that end up connecting. It's one of those stories that, again, like you don't have to be a sports fan to be like, holy crap, like this is something pretty damn special.
They should make a documentary out of it, isn't it, to come full circle on this?
Come on, someone had to be shooting something at that time. I mean, there was a documentary on Nick Bollettieri, and it was a lot of it focused on his relationship with Andre and like what that was like. And I think it's possibly because we know a lot more about it now, Bush, but like you see a lot of these kids who are now, we call it a factory. We call it a factory off the top of the show in terms of where Agassi came from. But like right now, it's It's hard to say it's changed much, has it? I mean, we're talking from the outside, but it kind of looks like the same system.
I have many things to say about Andre Agassi, and I think it's, as we said at the start of this podcast, his life deserves almost a series by itself, just given how interesting and his life and his career touch on so many wider topics, some of which are deeply troubling, not least his relationship with his father, not least how sad, I think, in a lot of ways, his early career was, and in terms of just how bullied he was. It's a tough read sometimes, and I think it's one of those things that you should go and check it out. You should be mindful of the fact that there's some pretty difficult reading it at that point, and it's not really a surprise that we got the career that he did. And I think him at 50 now, you look at what he's done post-career and how he's viewed now. I think he's done his meeting Steffi Graf certainly helped him with that. A pretty upstanding person by all accounts, and he's a completely changed man from the one that we saw in 1997, falling off the face of the earth and everything going wrong. And I think it's really testament to the fact of him digging himself out of that, him digging himself out of a massive hole with the support of some amazing people around him.
That's well said. Andre Medvedev made it to the fourth round of the French Open the following year and would retire in 2002. Andre had a few more years of greatness, to be frank. Yeah, he played well into his 30s. He finished with 8 Grand Slams, Olympic gold, Davis Cup 3 times, World Tour Finals once. He won that Super Slam, if you include the World Tour Finals, which I'm not sure is fair to do since it's a relatively new event. But it's a story made to be told in depth, and I hope someone randomly read my article on the Score and is like, you know what, we did have some tape somewhere, or we did have some footage from in the past, because I can't get over it, Bush. I wish those guys played a bigger role in the tour today. I know they have their own lives, of course, but it feels like an era of the tour just kind of went away, and it's a bit sad because those guys I watched a lot in my childhood, a lot of my youth. It's the reason why I'm a tennis fan today. Is a lot of it's because of watching these guys like Andre Agassi. So it'd be nice to see him around more often.
And I would like to get your opinion on this, maybe just closing out, because I have spoken at length on this podcast previously, and I think those people who know me know how important Andre Agassi is in terms of my tennis growing up and everything that goes with it. Roger Federer is clearly my favorite player of all time. Andre Agassi is a very close second, though. And I really genuinely believe in a lot of ways that he is the greatest American male player of all time. And I know there's going to be it's a very controversial opinion to say, and the fact that Pete Sampras won 14 Grand Slams and all the other people that came before him. On the male side, I'd be curious to know whether or not you think he's the best US male player of all time, because I clearly believe that. And I know that's probably going to get some opinions from some people.
Ooh, boy. I'll stay with Pete. I was a Pete guy myself. I'm a guy in that time when Pete and Andre played, I was firmly in the Pete camp. I liked aesthetically watching Pete more at that time, which I think is a bit weird because now I think, especially looking back at what I've watched the past few weeks, I'd much rather watch Andre's matches if I could do it over again, which I'm doing now. But at the time I wish I could bomb a serve like that. I wish I could have hit a forehand and like Pete did. But I think overall, if I'm looking at this as like agnostically and who is the greatest American male player of all time, I'm still going to go to the slam count. Even though I'll probably like Andre's game better, I'll still going to give it to Pete, because when they played against each other at the big moments, that was Pete's time as well.
One final point in this, and I think it's a really fascinating one to go out in terms of who Andre Agassi is. We've mentioned throughout this podcast that I believe his game translates beautifully to the modern era. I am really curious, and I know you can never compare eras, but what kind of player is he against these top 3 players of all time that we've seen over the last 20 years? Because peak Andre now against Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, I'd be so interested to see what record he'd have against them. I'd be fascinated.
Once we get some of the other problems sorted out in the world, of which there are a few, I know, I hope a man with infinite sums figures out a way to make it so that we can watch peak Novak or Novak now against peak Andre on a hard court in Indian Wells, preferably, because I would pay a lot. I think that'd be amazing to watch. My God.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. They're far more closely matched than the general public would believe. I don't think if you put Andre Agassi against peak Novak Djokovic in 2013, they're that far apart from each other. I really don't think it's... I still think Novak's probably a better player than him overall, but I don't think it's a wide margin at all.
Remember, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. A rating or review would be great. It helps us get our podcast into more ears around the world. We are also on patreon.com/openera for $3 a month. That'd be a massive help. A big thanks, as always, to our producer, Dylan Wilson. And for Simon and myself, that's it for this week. We'll talk to you soon.